Hello everyone, welcome to Recapping Stories. Today we'll be checking a movie called Seven. Warning, there will be spoilers. One morning, a man, Detectives Somerset, gets ready for work. While investigating a crime scene, his constant questions annoy another cop before a recently transferred detective, Detective Mills, arrives. Somerset invites him to a bar for a chat, but Mills declines. Somerset's curious about why Mills wanted to be transferred to this particular area and advises him to remember that, despite him having worked at homicides for 5 years, he has never worked around here before. The following morning, Mills is called to a crime scene. Still half asleep, his wife, Tracy, briefly complains about the tractor pulse before they kiss. Mills and Somerset go to a dark, dirty apartment, where they find a large man tied to a chair, his face on a plate of food, and a bucket underneath the table, filled with vomit. The coroner reveals the man ate until his stomach ripped, causing internal bleeding. There are also bruises possibly caused by a gun pressed against him. If it wasn't obvious by now, this was a homicide. The detectives talk with their superior, giving details of the case. Somerset believes the killer might just be getting started and wishes to be reassigned, as he doesn't want this to be his last case, once he's retiring in 6 days. He also expresses his belief that this shouldn't be Mills' first case, to which the other detective protests, insulted. The police captain tells Mills to leave the room and tells Somerset to keep investigating the case. Mills goes to another murder scene. The victim is a criminal defense attorney called Eli Gould. Blood was used to write the word greed on the floor and to draw circles around the eyes of a woman in a photo. The superior informs Somerset of the murder, also questioning his desire to retire, saying Somerset was born to be a cop. In his turn, Somerset tells of a violent attack that happened close to his home, explaining how he doesn't understand the place anymore, with the sort of mindless violence. The superior gives him a bottle with small pieces of plastic that were fed to the obese victim. Somerset returns to the first murder scene and notices scratches on the floor that match the pieces given to the victim. When he pulls the fridge, he finds the word gluttony written on the wall, as well as a paper with a verse from Paradise Lost by Milton, confirming that the killer is just getting started and that Gould was another victim. Still not wanting to be involved in this particular case, Somerset leaves, but finds himself restless later that night and goes to a library, picking several books on the 7 deadly sins, observing several gruesome illustrations. He sends the list to Mills, advising him to read them as well, and take several photocopies. At the same time, Mills is reading the reports on the scene of the gluttony victim. The next morning, Mills is in his car and a policeman gives him summarized versions of the books of the list Somerset provided him. As his new office was previously Somerset's, they share the space for the time being. Mills gets a call from his wife and she asks to speak with Somerset, inviting him to supper that night. The dinner starts awkward, but ends well and Trace and Somerset start to become friends. Mills and Somerset discuss the case as they analyze the photos and reports. It turns out Gould was forced to cut a pound of his own flesh off, and a verse of the Merchant of Venice was also found on the scene, similar to how they found the verse of Paradise Lost. Both discuss how the victims are unrelated, there are no fingerprints and no witnesses, which frustrates Mills. Somerset points out how women are taught to yell fire rather than help when attacked. Mills points out how fucked up this is. The woman in the photo is Miss Gould, who was out of town at the time of the murder, but the blood marks might mean there's something she saw or needs to see. They go visit her, in the hopes she might offer information of any kind, but the woman is distressed and in too much grief. However, she notices that a painting in her husband's office is upside down, At first, the clue seems to be a dead end. There is no note behind the painting or inside the canvas, but some inspection reveals fingerprints on the wall. While the forensic team analyzes the wall, Mills asks Somerset if he has ever seen something like this. Somerset admits he hasn't. A special light reveals a message from the killer made with the fingerprints. "Help me." The fingerprints are sent for analysis, but they only find a match the next day. A man called Theodore Allen, a criminal with a long list, including armed robbery, assault, and attempted rape of a minor, for which he received a light sentence thanks to his lawyer, the greedy victim, Eli Good. The detectives, along with several policemen and a SWAT team, raid Allen's apartment, where they find a gruesome scene. The man is tied down to a bed, severely emaciated and covered with sores. Above him the word sloth is written on the wall. Several photos, arranged in a box nearby, register the progress of Allen's decay, the oldest of them dating 1 year ago. An agent approaches the man, who starts to twist and groan. To everyone's horror, Allen is still alive. Seeing Mills agitated, Somerset reminds him they have to separate themselves from their emotions, but Mills is too angry to care. When a reporter comes by, taking photos of them, Mills snaps and yells at him to leave. At the hospital, the doctor tells them that Allen has had 1 year of mobility, and blood tests show the presence of drugs and antibiotics used to keep him alive. He is in no state to answer any questions, as his brain has deteriorated as well, and he has chewed off his own tongue. He would die of shock if someone so much as flashed a light on his eyes. Later that night, Tracy calls Somerset and asks to meet the next day, as she needs someone to talk to. Somerset agrees. Tracy is hesitant to talk to her husband about how she feels, not wanting to be a burden. Eventually, she confesses that she is pregnant. Although Somerset doesn't feel like the best person to talk about it, he relates to her when she tearfully admits that she hates the city. Somerset tells her that he and a lover almost had a baby once, but he was scared and couldn't imagine a child growing up with all the violence around. Because of that, he wore his lover down until she aborted. Even if he still thinks he made the right decision, every day Somerset wishes that he had made a different choice. The only advice he can give Tracy is to never tell Mills about it if she decides to not have the baby, but to spoil it as much as possible if she keeps it. Tracy thanks him. Back at the office, Somerset points out the level of planning and attention to detail that the killer displays. Mills' opinion is that the guy is a nutjob. Suddenly have an idea, Somerset takes Mills to the library, where they once again list several books. After that, they go to a diner, where Somerset asks Mills for money. A man comes in and sits with them. Somerset, under the table, passes him all the cash. This man is from the FBI, which is hooked to the library, and keeps a list of people who check certain red flag books, meaning he can get them a list of names connected to books on the theme of sins and violence, and from that they can get an address. Eventually they find a name, Jonathan Doe. As they are about to enter Doe's apartment, a man stops at the end of the hallway and shoots at them when they notice him. Mills chases him as Somerset rushes to the back door of the building to intercept him, but the man corners Mills after wounding him. After making a point that he could kill Mills, pressing the detective's gun against his temple, the man runs away. Mills insists to go to the apartment, being stopped by Somerset. They don't have a justification for how they got to the apartment, not without revealing the FBI's list, and they don't have a warrant. So if they do that, they won't be able to prosecute the killer. Mills agrees to disagree. He bribes a kid to say she called Somerset, after noticing a creepy person get in and out of the building, which worried her, as a murder has happened nearby. The apartment is full of religious objects, drugs, the preserved hand of Allen, photos of victims, and several notebooks written by the killer. Photos also reveal that the photographer Mills confronted at the crime scene of the sloth victim was the killer all along. The forensic team gathers evidence, makes a sketch of the killer's face, but can't find a single fingerprint around, to Mills' disbelief. Meanwhile, Somerset reads the killer's notebooks, studying his talks. A hidden telephone starts to ring. Mills finds it and picks it up. The killer expresses admiration for the officers and tells them he'll change his schedule due to the events of the day. As Somerset and Mills examine the photos gathered in the apartment, they find a possible next victim, a blonde hooker. They visit a sex shop, based on one receipt they found. The owner recognizes John Doe and shows them a picture of a customized tool he made for him, thinking he was a performance artist. The tool certainly is not something any sane person would want to put to actual use. Somerset receives a call. The blonde hooker has been found. They go to a club dedicated to adult fun. One of the room doors has dust carved on it. Inside, they find the woman, dead, and a man crying for the cops to take something off him. It's pretty clear both were engaged in very much non-consensual sex from both parts. Although he's still in shock and traumatized, the man manages to tell the cops that John Doe forced him to wear the tool and have sex with the hooker, threatening him with a gun. He ends up breaking down, crying. Later, as they drink together, Somerset points out there's no way for this case to have a happy ending. Mills, however, says he'll be happy as long as they catch the culprit. The following day, Doe calls 911, taking the detectives to the next murder. A woman is lying on her bed, face covered in bandages, a bottle of sleeping pills glued to one hand and a phone on the other, and above it, written on the wall, is the word pride. Apparently the woman, not bearing the idea of living disfigured, chose to kill herself. After they return to their office, Mills and Somerset are surprised when a blood-covered John Doe enters the station and surrenders. The reason why no one ever found Doe's fingerprints is made clear soon. He cuts the skin off his fingers to prevent that from happening. Other than that, there are also no registers of employment or credit history. Whoever this man was born as, it was his choice to become John Doe. Both Somerset and Mills agree that this doesn't seem right, and there's no way Doe would just give himself in without a plan. His lawyer confirms this, revealing that there are 2 more bodies hidden, and Doe will take only Detectives Somerset and Mills to their location. If they accept his deal, Doe will sign a full confession. If not, he'll plead insanity. Agreeing with the deal, Mills and Somerset get ready, with wires taped on them. A police chopper also prepares to follow them. The ride takes them out of town, and during this, Somerset tries to find out who Doe actually is. In his turn, Doe remains calm, until Mills refers to his victims as innocents, at which point Doe becomes angered, pointing out his victims' deep involvement with their sins and their crimes. As far as he's concerned, none of them was innocent, and the problem is how people banalize and ignore this, the crimes, the violence, and the sins. Doe also gets on Mills nervous when he affirms that the only reason why he was caught is that he surrendered. They arrive at the deserted area, where they get out of the car. A van approaches and Somerset rushes to stop it, pointing a gun at the driver and telling him to get out. The man, frightened, explains he's only there to deliver a package to someone called Detective David Mills, and gives a box to Somerset, who briefly hesitates before opening it. He backs away in shock, and, understanding what is Doe's plan, he runs back to Mills. Meanwhile, Doe talks to Mills about the detective's life, eventually mentioning Tracy, which gets the man's attention. Doe reveals he went to Mills' house, and, in his own words, tried to play husband and taste the life of a simple man, but it didn't work. So he took Tracy's head as a souvenir. Mills, disturbed, demands to know what Somerset saw in the box. Somerset tries to calm him, pointing out that Doe wants Mills to shoot him, and if he does, Doe wins. Doe, in his turn, keeps goading Mills, claiming envy is his own sin, and he wants Mills to become the sin of wrath. He also reveals that Tracy was pregnant, at which point Somerset hits him. It all becomes too much for Mills and he snaps, killing Doe. Mills is arrested and the superior asks where Somerset will be. He simply replies he'll be around, meaning he won't retire anymore. The movie ends with Somerset quoting Hemingway about the world being a fine place to live and worth fighting for. However, Somerset can only agree about the second part. One of the main themes of the movie is the matter of cynicism versus optimism, as well as violence and cruelty, not only in the way present by the murders, but also in the way we encounter them in our everyday lives. At one point, Somerset talks about how he can't stand a city that embraces and nurtures a pet in the face of those things, even though it's the easier way to deal with it. We can't say this is not true, considering how much violence we see on the news every day, to the point it becomes normal, rather than something that causes a lasting reaction. This is reinforced by other characters, who apparently don't blink an eye to the violence around them. One example is the owner of the club where the crime of lust occurs. As he's questioned by Mills if he enjoys the things he sees in his establishment, he admits he doesn't, but that this is life. We can't say the movie ends on a particularly happy note, considering that Doe, and by extension the worst side of a human being, has won. But we can't say it's an ending without any hope either. As Somerset points out, the world might not be a good place, but it doesn't mean it's not worth fighting for.